The night was darker than usual. The sky was covered with thick, heavy clouds, and the wind howled through the trees like a wild animal. Harold Kemp, an old farmer in his late 60s, sat alone by the fire in his small wooden house at the edge of his farm. The farm was quiet except for the sound of the storm outside. He had lived here for many years, taking care of his land, his animals, and his memories. Harold's life had changed a lot since his wife passed away 2 years ago. She had been his partner for more than 40 years, helping him through the hard times and sharing the good ones. But now the house felt empty, and the silence was sometimes too loud. Harold spent most of his days working outside, fixing fences, planting seeds, or checking on the chickens and cows. Even though he was getting older, he still found comfort in the simple routine of farm life. On this stormy night, Harold heard a strange noise coming from outside his house. It was soft at first, like a small animal crying for help. Curious and a little worried, he grabbed his old lantern and stepped out into the cold wind. The rain was starting to fall heavily, and the lightning lit up the sky, showing flashes of the tall trees and wide fields around him. He walked slowly toward the barn, where he kept his tools and the animals. The noise was clearer now, a soft, almost human sound, but different somehow. When Harold reached the barn door, he saw something that stopped him in his tracks. There, curled up behind a pile of hay, was a young girl, but she was not like any girl he had ever seen. Her skin was pale and almost glowed faintly in the dark. Her eyes were large and round, shining with fear and confusion. She looked lost and very tired, shivering in the cold rain with only a thin piece of cloth wrapped around her. Harold's heart went out to her. He didn't know where she had come from or what she was, but she needed help. Without hesitation, Harold opened the barn door and helped her inside. He gently wrapped his old coat around her shoulders and guided her to a warm corner near the stove. The girl looked at him with wide eyes, not speaking a word, but slowly she relaxed as the warmth spread through her body. Harold brought her a bowl of warm water and some bread from his kitchen. She took the food carefully, as if it was something new to her. When she ate, Harold watched her closely, trying to understand her story, but she only smiled softly and shook her head when he tried to ask questions. There was no way to tell where she came from or how she ended up on his farm in the middle of a storm. For the next few days, Harold took care of the girl. He called her Aya, a name he chose because it sounded simple and kind. She was quiet, but curious, watching everything around her with eyes full of wonder. She seemed to learn quickly, copying Harold's movements and trying to help with small tasks on the farm. Harold noticed that Aya was different from anyone he had ever met. She didn't seem to need much food or rest, and sometimes her skin changed colors, soft shades of blue and green that shimmered in the sunlight. At first, Harold thought it was just the way the light hit her, but soon he realized it was something special about her. The neighbors talked about the strange girl at Harold's farm. Some were scared and warned him to be careful. Others were curious but didn't want to get too close. Harold didn't care what they said. He knew that Aya was not dangerous. She was lost and needed a place to belong. At night, when the farm was quiet and the stars shone brightly above, Harold and Aya would sit by the fire. She never spoke words he could understand, but she told stories with her eyes and hands. She pointed to the stars and made shapes in the air, showing Harold things he could only imagine. Sometimes Harold wondered if Aya was from another world. It was hard to believe, but how else could he explain the strange light in her eyes, or the way she moved like she belonged somewhere far away? But it didn't matter to him where she came from. What mattered was that she was here now, and he would do everything he could to keep her safe. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Aya showed Harold a small stone she had found hidden in the barn. It was smooth and cool to the touch, with strange symbols carved into its surface. Harold ran his fingers over the marks, feeling a strange warmth spread through his hand. He didn't understand the meaning, but he felt a connection. As if the stone was a key to something much bigger than his farm. Days turned into weeks and the storm passed, but Aya stayed. Harold built her a small room in the barn with clean blankets and a window that looked out onto the fields. She helped him with the chores, feeding the chickens and watering the plants. Slowly, they became a family of two, an old farmer and a lost girl who didn't belong to this world. Harold never imagined his quiet life would change like this. He had been alone for so long, but now he had someone to care for, someone who trusted him without words. And though he didn't know what the future held, he felt a new hope growing inside him, a hope that maybe, just maybe, this strange girl was meant to be part of his life forever. Harold watched Aya carefully every day. She was different from anyone he had ever met, but she was learning fast. Even though she didn't speak his language, she found ways to understand him. Harold found that patience and small actions were enough. He would show her how to do simple things on the farm, and she would copy him quietly. Aya was especially interested in the chickens. She spent hours near the hen house, watching the birds peck at the ground and cluck softly. One morning, Harold woke early and found her sitting on a small wooden stool, gently holding a chicken's egg. Her eyes were wide with wonder. She turned to him and smiled softly, as if sharing a secret. The barn soon became a special place for Aya. She liked the smell of fresh hay and the sound of animals around her. Harold saw her touching the eggs carefully, sometimes moving them around in neat patterns. It was clear she cared deeply about the eggs, almost like they were precious treasures. One day, as Harold worked outside, he noticed something unusual in the barn. The eggs Aya had been caring for were glowing faintly. It was not a bright light, but a soft, warm shine that filled the dark space. Harold was surprised but didn't want to frighten Aya. Instead, he cleaned the barn more carefully and made sure it was warm and safe. Aya seemed happy. She hummed softly, a sound like a gentle wind, and worked hard to keep the barn tidy. Harold realized she was trying to take care of something very important. She was making a home for the eggs, just as Harold had made a home for her. Even though they could not talk with words, Harold and Aya found ways to communicate. She would point to things she wanted or use simple signs. Harold learned to understand her feelings through her eyes and the way she moved. Sometimes she would touch his hand gently and smile, and Harold felt a deep kindness in her. Outside, the farm was changing too. Harold had planted seeds earlier in the spring, but now the plants were growing faster and healthier than ever before. The fields looked greener and full of life. Harold thought it was because of the good weather, but he also believed that Aya's presence was a special blessing for the land. Neighbors started to notice the change. Some stopped by and asked Harold how his crops were doing so well. He just smiled and said it was hard work and a little luck. No one knew the secret of the glowing eggs in the barn or the strange girl who had appeared during the storm. One afternoon, a young neighbor named Sarah came to visit. She was curious about Aya and wanted to meet her. Harold was nervous at first, but Aya welcomed Sarah with a soft smile. Sarah was surprised by Aya's gentle nature and how carefully she handled the animals. She said Aya seemed like she belonged on the farm. Harold felt happy to see Aya making friends. He hoped she would find comfort and trust with others too. But Aya remained close to him, following him around the farm like a shadow. She called him by a word that sounded like husband, but Harold did not understand what it meant yet. He only knew it was a special name for him. Days passed, and Harold discovered more about Aya's unusual abilities. Sometimes she would touch the eggs, and they would change colors, from soft blue to light green. Once she placed her hand on the earth, and small plants sprouted quickly in the soil. Harold was amazed by these small miracles, but never asked too many questions. He knew some things were better left to time. At night, Harold and Aya would sit by the fire in the barn. She would bring him strange stones or small flowers he had never seen before. Sometimes, she made drawings in the dirt, using symbols that looked like stars and circles. Harold tried to understand their meaning but gave up and simply enjoyed her company. He felt a warm happiness he hadn't known in years. Aya's quiet presence filled the empty spaces in his life. Even though she was different and mysterious, she became like family to him. Harold no longer felt lonely, and the farm felt alive again. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Aya surprised Harold. She led him to the barn's loft, where the eggs were kept. Carefully, she picked one up and held it close to her chest. Then she placed her hand over Harold's heart and looked into his eyes with deep meaning. "It means more than just eggs," she seemed to say without words. "It means life, hope, family." Harold felt a lump in his throat. He understood then that Aya was not just caring for the eggs. She was creating a future where they belonged together. He smiled and nodded, feeling a new promise in his heart. No matter what happened, they would face it together. Days passed quietly on Harold's farm, but one morning everything changed. High above the wide fields, a strange humming noise filled the air. Harold looked up and saw a small drone flying slowly over the barn. It was like nothing he had ever seen before, smooth and silver with blinking lights on its sides. The drone moved carefully, almost as if it was searching for something. Harold felt a chill run down his spine. He didn't know who had sent the drone, or why it was watching his farm. Aya, who was standing nearby, noticed it too. Her eyes grew wide, and she stepped closer to Harold, holding his hand tightly. The strange girl, who had been so calm and gentle, suddenly seemed scared. A few hours later, loud trucks with dark windows rolled down the dirt road toward Harold's farm. Men wearing plain clothes got out and walked quickly toward the barn. Harold recognized the look in their eyes, serious and cold, like they were on an important mission. They didn't smile or say hello. Instead, they started asking questions about Harold's farm and if he had seen anything unusual. Harold felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He didn't want to get into trouble or bring harm to Aya. He only said the simple truth. He had found a lost girl during the storm and was taking care of her, but the men didn't seem to believe him. They asked more questions and wanted to see the barn. When the men tried to open the barn door, Aya suddenly let out a strange cry. It was not a normal scream, but a long, soft sound that reminded Harold of wind moving through metal pipes. The sound made the men freeze for a moment. Then, the eggs in the barn began to glow more brightly than ever before, pulsing with a gentle light. Harold was surprised and a little scared. He didn't understand what was happening, but he saw that the eggs were reacting to Aya's fear and the men's presence. The men took a step back and looked at each other. Harold knew this was his chance to protect Aya and the farm. That night, after the men left, Harold sat with Aya in the barn. She was shaking and looked tired. Harold wrapped his old coat around her shoulders and held her close. She looked up at him with eyes full of trust, and Harold made a silent promise to keep her safe no matter what. The next day, Harold made a decision. He took out old tools from the barn and started covering the windows with thick cloth. He also hid any tracking devices he could find and burned an old cell phone repeater that sometimes gave him weak signals. He wanted to make sure no one could find out too much about Aya or the eggs. Harold knew the world outside the farm was different from the peaceful life he had always known. The government, or whoever those men were, might not understand Aya or want to help her. They might see her as a threat or something to control. Harold didn't want that for her. He wanted her to be free. Days went by in a quiet but tense silence. Harold and Aya stayed close to the barn, careful not to draw attention. Harold repaired the fences and kept the animals safe, while Aya continued to care for the eggs. The eggs still glowed softly like small lights in the dark. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky with orange and pink colors, Aya showed Harold something new. She brought a small, smooth stone from outside. The stone shone with a gentle blue light, unlike anything Harold had seen before. She held it in her hands and then placed it near the eggs. To Harold's amazement, the eggs began to pulse in time with the glowing stone. It was as if the stone and the eggs were connected. Aya looked at Harold with hope in her eyes, and Harold felt a strange warmth spread through his chest. This was no ordinary farm, and Aya was no ordinary girl. Despite the fear and uncertainty, Harold felt stronger than ever. He was ready to protect Aya and the new life she was caring for. The farm was no longer just a place to grow crops or raise animals. It was a home for something new and wonderful, something that needed love and patience to grow. Harold understood that Aya called him husband, not just as a word, but as a symbol of their bond. It was a promise of care, trust, and protection. He didn't fully understand her world or her past, but he knew that he would stand by her side no matter what. At night, when the farm was quiet and the stars twinkled in the sky, Harold thought about the future. He wondered what the glowing eggs would become, and how Aya's world connected to his own. He knew there would be challenges ahead, but for the first time in many years, he felt hope and joy. The old farmer and the lost girl had found each other, in the middle of a storm. Together they were building something new, a family that no one could take away. Would you like me to continue with part 4 next? The days grew longer and warmer as spring turned into early summer. Harold and Aya had settled into a quiet routine on the farm. Though they still did not speak the same language, a deep understanding had grown between them. Harold learned to read Aya's eyes and gestures, and Aya seemed to understand his kindness and care. One evening, after the sun had dipped behind the hills and the sky was painted in soft purples and pinks, Aya did something that surprised Harold. She took his hand gently and led him to the barn loft, where the glowing eggs rested on soft straw. She picked one egg up carefully and held it close to her chest. The egg glowed softly in her hands, shining like a small star. Then Aya placed her other hand over Harold's heart. She looked deeply into his eyes, and for the first time, Harold felt she was trying to tell him something very important. He didn't understand her words, but her eyes spoke clearly. This moment was special. She whispered the word husband, but in her own way, softly and meaningfully. It was not just a simple name. To Aya, this word meant much more. It was a promise of trust, protection, and belonging. It meant that Harold was not just a caretaker, but family. Aya was telling Harold that she trusted him completely, and that he was part of her life in a way that went beyond words. Harold felt a warm feeling in his chest. He had been alone for so long after his wife passed away, and now this strange, beautiful girl was calling him husband. He smiled, not sure what to say, but knowing that he wanted to be the man she believed him to be. After that evening, their bond grew stronger. Aya seemed happier, more at peace. She moved with a quiet confidence, caring for the eggs and the animals, always close to Harold's side. She showed him new things, too. One day, she took Harold's hand and guided him to the fields, where she touched the earth gently. To Harold's amazement, small green shoots sprouted immediately beneath her fingers. It was like magic. The plants grew faster and stronger than he had ever seen before. Harold laughed with joy. It was a sign that Aya's presence was a blessing to the land and that their lives were connected deeply. Neighbors began to notice changes on the farm. The crops grew taller, the fruits were sweeter, and the animals seemed healthier. Some whispered stories about the glowing barn and the strange girl who cared for the eggs. Harold did not mind their whispers. He was happy to have Aya by his side and the farm thriving under their care. At night, Harold and Aya would sit quietly by the fire. Aya would show him pictures she had drawn in the dirt with a stick, circles, stars, and shapes that seemed to tell a story he could only guess. Harold listened carefully, feeling like he was part of a secret world. Sometimes Aya would look at the sky and hum softly, a sound that made Harold feel calm and peaceful. He liked to think that Aya was connected to the stars somehow, and that she had come to his farm for a reason. One evening, Harold asked Aya if she wanted to visit the nearby town. Aya looked nervous at first, but nodded slowly. So, one afternoon, Harold and Aya took a slow walk to the town nearby. Aya's eyes were full of wonder as she saw cars, shops, and people moving quickly. People stared at Aya. Her pale skin shining softly in the sunlight, and her quiet, calm presence made her seem different. Some were curious, some were cautious, but Aya did not speak or act scared. She held Harold's hand tightly, trusting him completely. At the small grocery store, Harold bought some simple food, bread, fruit, and cheese. Aya smiled when she tasted the sweet strawberries. It was a small joy that made Harold's heart feel full. When they returned to the farm, Aya showed Harold a small flower she had picked in the town square. She placed it near the eggs as if it was a gift. Harold smiled, understanding that this was her way of sharing something special with him. As summer grew closer, the eggs in the barn continued to glow softly. Aya spent hours tending to them, singing soft songs in her quiet voice. Harold knew that soon something new would happen, something that would change their lives again. But no matter what the future held, Harold felt ready. He was no longer the lonely old farmer who lived only for his crops and animals. He had a family now, strange, wonderful, and full of hope. Aya called him husband, not because of a ceremony or a word, but because of a deep, unspoken promise. They belonged to each other in a way that was real and strong, and that was enough. The warm days of summer had arrived, and the farm felt alive like never before. Harold woke early every morning, ready to see what new surprises the day might bring. Aya was already awake, tending to the animals and caring for the glowing eggs in the barn loft. Their life had settled into a peaceful rhythm, but Harold knew something big was coming. One morning, Harold found Aya sitting quietly in the barn, holding one of the eggs close to her chest. The egg pulsed gently with soft light, brighter than usual. Harold could see the hope in Aya's eyes as she smiled at him. It was a smile filled with trust and excitement, a promise that something wonderful was about to happen. Slowly, the eggs began to hatch. One by one, the shells cracked open, and tiny creatures emerged. They were unlike anything Harold had ever seen, small, delicate beings with soft, glowing skin and eyes that reminded him of Aya's, full of curiosity and kindness. They moved, gently, exploring their new world with wonder and trust. Harold was amazed. These creatures were like a part of Aya's family, born from the eggs she had cared for so carefully. They did not look like animals or birds, but something new, living, beings connected to the land and to Aya's mysterious past. Harold felt honored to be part of this new life. The creatures soon grew stronger and began to explore the barn and the farm. They were gentle and quiet, making soft sounds like the whisper of the wind. Harold watched them with joy, knowing that Aya's care had made this miracle possible. The neighbors noticed the strange creatures, but saw that they were harmless and kind. Some came to visit, bringing food and gifts for Aya and the little beings. The farm became a place of wonder and hope for the whole community. Harold and Aya worked together to protect their new family. They built small nests and safe places for the creatures to rest and grow. Aya taught Harold how to care for them in ways he had never imagined, showing him gentle touches and quiet songs. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky with golden colors, Aya took Harold's hand and led him to the edge of the fields. There the creatures gathered around them, glowing softly in the twilight. Aya looked at Harold and smiled. In that moment, Harold understood everything. Aya's world had come alive on his farm. The creatures, the eggs, and Aya herself were part of a new beginning. They had created a family that was different from any other, a family made of trust, love, and hope. Harold felt a deep happiness inside. He had lived many years alone, but now he was surrounded by life and love. Aya, the lost girl he had found, in a storm, had become his companion, his partner, and his family. As the stars appeared in the night sky, Harold and Aya sat together watching the creatures play in the soft moonlight. The farm was no longer just a place of work. It was a home filled with light, life, and the promise of tomorrow. Harold knew that challenges might still come. The world outside might not always understand their family or accept what they had built. But for now, in this quiet corner of the world, they were safe and happy. Aya still called him husband, not just as a word, but as a symbol of their bond, a bond that could not be broken by time or distance. Harold smiled, knowing that whatever the future held, they would face it together. The old farmer and the lost alien girl had found something rare and beautiful, a family created by kindness, trust, and the courage to accept the unknown. And so, life on the farm continued, full of glowing eggs, gentle creatures, and a love that crossed worlds.